cares if I don't know what Armageddon means? It's not the end of the world. Aloha and welcome back to my channel. I'm Marilyn, aka Maya, the Baby Boomer Booktuber, and welcome to my show. I've read a lot of books this month. I've read 5 books and I'm almost finished with 2 more. So this is my official May wrap-up. So let's get started. My first book is Cora Sandel's Selected Short Stories, and it'll be right here. Cora Sandel was a Norwegian feminist writer. And when I first read the stories in the book, I thought maybe I wasn't smart enough to really get the full extent of her writing. I had to read it more than once. And I have to say that on the second reading, I started to get her genius. And though I can't say I loved all her stories, I will say that I'm not regularly a short story reader. It's not my thing usually. I like to get more embroiled in the story, and with some of the stories were only two pages long. So the one of the last story in the book was my favorite, and it was called To Lucas, and it's a possibly never sent letter from a woman during World War II to her husband, who is exiled by the Nazi occupation. What was genius about this story is she never mentions Germans, Nazis, or even the country that she's exiled to, which I later found out was Sweden. And she feels like an outsider there. And she has, I didn't feel that sorry for her, because people that were lucky enough to get to Sweden didn't have to go to the concentration camps. But it was very poignant. The way she loved her husband and wished so much that he was there. So that was the second story. I mean, the last story in the collection. And the first story was one of her favorite. I don't have the name of the story, but it's a little girl that loves to run. I think that's what it was called, The Girl That Loved to Run. And while she's running, she's trying to escape from what would be her life, that she's supposed to be a very, subservient girl, listen to her parents, never really go outside of the home. So it was a simple story with a very strong message of feminism. But it was a simple story. So I had to read it again before I really understood what she was trying to say. But I think a lot of people might like this book more than I did. I gave it 3 stars. Okay, the next book that I'm going to talk about, I also don't have. It's called Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto, and I also gave it 3 stars. And this story is a translated story, and I don't think I have the translation with me at the moment. But let me see if I wrote it down. No, I didn't. But all I'll say about it is I understand why this book was a bestseller in Japan, because it kind of gives a voice to confused young adults in Japan. I lived in Japan myself for 3 years, and I know that living as a young adult in Japan is not an easy thing. First of all, you have all the rules that the adults are telling you, and there's so many rules. As a gaijin, a foreigner, I didn't have to follow all those rules, just very few of them. But I know that just knowing what those rules are is like a lifetime, thing. Okay, so back to the story. It's sort of a love story, and the principal character, Mirage, I think that's the way you say her name, and Yuichi is the boy, and they go to college. And so Yuichi's mother is a transsexual. Her name is Eriko, and she works in a bar. She was formerly Yuichi's biological father. Are you catching all this? And now she's his mother. And she's a very exuberant, lovable woman. They all like to shop and bring home a lot of stuff. So I say she's bubbly, she's full of fun. And then I say, but is she? Because she's dealing with a lot. She's bringing up her son. The mother had died, and then she had her operation. And Yuichi is a very interesting character, but we'll get to him later. So when Mirage's grandmother dies, she goes into a deep depression. And this is where kitchen comes in, because food and kitchen is a theme in this book. And she loves to cook. She loves kitchens. I mean, she just loves different things about kitchens. And that theme is repeated over and over in the book. So where I didn't like it, where I started not liking it, she moves in with Yuichi. And her and Eriko have this sort of insta-love, which I couldn't understand where it was coming from. But Eriko, Yuichi's mother, took a liking to Mirage. And I didn't see the reason behind it. I mean, she was a nice girl, but I just didn't see why they wanted this is not a typical thing in Japan to just have somebody move in. And, but she moves in. So I read that the translation wasn't up to par. And maybe that's why it was something lost in translation, because many people, Banana Yoshimoto is an author who has made a big splash in Japan. And so it could be that I'm not getting the theme that really stood with all these, with the Japanese young adults. But I read that in Japanese, the prose is breathtaking. I found some of the prose breathtaking and some pretty clunky. But like I said, that could have been part of the translation. So there's a feeling of heaviness and magical realism through the book. And what I have to say is that I couldn't connect with the characters. Well, maybe this book is not written for me. It's written as a book for Japanese readers. So that's maybe why. So Yuichi is grieving for her grandmother during the whole book. I get that. But yet all the characters seem so distant and some even unlikable. And there's a depressing ambience throughout the book. Well, I enjoyed the cooking scenes. It brought back a lot of memories about the different foods in Japan that I ate. And I enjoyed her really talking about kitchens in general. But I have to say, I struggled with the book. There's a sort of love story between Yuichi and Mirage, but I couldn't feel it. I mean, it reminded me a little of the movie Lost in Translation, where everyone is just like looking out of windows, and I couldn't connect with that story, with that movie, and I couldn't connect with this book. But I say I will give Banana Yoshimoto another try. So that's my review, sort of, and my wrap-up of Kitchen. All right, so the next book that I have to talk about, it goes all the way up from 3 stars to 5 stars, and that's The Hollow. And I read this on my iPhone. So I listened to it, but I had read the book before because I read all of Agatha Christie's books when I was in my 30s. But this was a very unique experience. This book was a journey. Hugh Fraser, the actor, he's the narrator of the book, and he does all the voices as he did in Poirot's, I think it was In the Clouds book that I really enjoyed. So I enjoyed it because of that. He deliciously acts out all the voices, and he makes them very distinct. I knew who everyone was. So I remembered the plot from the first time I read the book. And basically it's about the Angatels it's a dysfunctional family, very dysfunctional. And someone gets killed and it goes on from there. I'm not going to spoil the plot for you. I did come across something that I either missed when I read the book, or because it was an audio, it just took me by surprise, and I'll read it. It's a poem. And so I call it a missed gem. And it's a poem by Lord Alfred Tennyson. And it's called Maud, Part 1. I hate the dreadful hollow behind the little wood. Its lips in the field above are dabbled with blood-red heath. The red-ribbed ledges drip with a silent horror of blood, and echo there, whatever is asked her, answers death. So I'm learning a lot about Agatha Christie, that she liked Lord Tennyson, Alfred Tennyson. So the story is gloriously plotted as usual because it's an Agatha Christie. Characters wonderfully drawn. The women characters distinct from each other. Strong, complex. So basically, like I said, it's about a dysfunctional family, the Angatels, and how one person's thoughtlessness leads to murder. What I liked is that no one here is totally good or evil, and that's good. And also that Agatha Christie was a marvelous plotter, and she didn't cheat. She left you a chance. She gave you a chance to find out who the murderer was. I had forgotten who the murderer was, so it was a surprise to me. What I wrote on Goodreads was, I think that this might be my favorite Agatha Christie book. Now I'll step in and say it's not, because I read one that I liked better after this. And she wrote this book in 1946 when she was 56 and had done a lot of living. She doesn't mince words like lover, mistresses, affair, damn, etc. And she also can't hide her true self. No writer can. But here again, she again mentions how she had a wonderful childhood. And that we know if we read any autobiography about or from Agatha Christie, autobiography. And she also says that in a wonderful childhood, a person can't imagine the horror that awaits. So that also tells me about Agatha Christie, how she felt about the difference between her childhood and her life afterwards. She voices similar thoughts in many of her other books. So how much did I love this book? I want to get a physical copy and read it again. So 5 stars for The Hollow. Okay, my next book that I want to talk about is Underground in Berlin. And this book was written by Marie Jalowicz Simon. I had started this a month ago, and I just finished it for May. So it wasn't started in May, but it was finished in May. I have so much to say about this book. I gave it 5 stars. And basically, I'll just tell you really quick what it's about. In 1942, a 20-year-old Jewish Berliner furtively resolves to do everything in her power to avoid the concentration camps. She removed her yellow star, took on an assumed identity, and disappeared into the city. So she's what they call them, a submarine. I knew how to say it in German, but I forgot. Anyway, this woman was something else. She told this story by memory to her son, who was a historian, when she was like 90. And she had a memory that was unbelievable. And this story, I want to say first that it's almost like a love-hate story, not of the war as much as it is of Berlin. If you want to know what Berlin really was like during the war, read this book. Not only for a person in hiding, but just in general about Berlin, about things about Berlin that for the first time in my life, it made me want to visit Germany and Berlin, because there were people that helped her. And I'll read you more about the different kinds of people that helped her. Communists helped her. People from, well, there were communists too, but they were haters of Hitler. Some were Germans, and one was a Nazi. Of course, he didn't know she was Jewish. And one thing I thought was interesting was that at one point she told people she was half Jewish, or they told her to say. In other words, that wasn't as terrible as being fully Jewish. Let me just tell you one thing. This woman, there's a picture of her. Let me see. So I don't know if you can see this picture. She was extraordinarily beautiful. She was 17 years old, and she was very lucky, as well as very smart. Before I read you what other people say, I went on Goodreads, and I was surprised to find out, I really was surprised to find out, especially after reading the wonderful blurbs that were on the back of the book, that people really disliked her. They thought she was a snob, that she was, she looked down on people, that her voice didn't come through as a young girl. I beg to differ. The first chapter, also that she had no emotions. Now try to think of a young girl. She has no parents. It's 1943. She's in Germany. She has papers that aren't real good identity papers, false papers. A woman gave her her papers to use, but it wasn't a good copy. And she has to trust people, take chances. You have to be very strong to do that. And maybe some of that strength came across to readers as she wasn't likable. She should have been more emotional. In the first chapter, she's sent to a bar where she meets a woman German woman who has been given money to find her a place to stay. And she finds out that the place that she has to stay is with a Nazi with syphilis. I mean, she has to hide that she's Jewish, and she's going to stay with him and keep house for him and do whatever it takes to live. Fortunately, she says, he told her he couldn't make love to her because he wasn't able anymore, and she assumes that he had some kind of syphilis as she got to know him better. But she's very scared, and her youth shows out in that little chapter. She only stays with him for a short amount of time, and she goes to other places. But she was so afraid that because he was such a Jew hater that he was tending a whole tank of fish, and she looks at the fish like, if I can only find a Jewish blessing for the fish, this is going to help me from showing how shocked I am about things he's saying about me, really, about her. And she looks at the fish and she blesses the fish and she says, "Oh, what a wonderful fish tank you have." And he was so, he got off of the Jew hating part, and he says, "Oh, I'm so glad you noticed, something that's important to me." So she was smart, but the fact that she doesn't show all of her emotions all the time is very understandable. Anyway, other people have said that she was a fighter, blessed with an even temper, optimism, a ferocious will, a clear sense of what life could offer her, and a readiness to laugh at herself. And another blurb writer says, from the Smithsonian, Marie Jalowicz will and wit echo the determination and optimism of diarists such as Viktor Frankl and Anne Frank. Brutally unsentimental, a fascinating read. Simon's memoir deserves a place of honor. I agree with these blurbs. I don't usually agree with blurbs, but an unsentimental memoir, there's a lot of sentiment in this memoir. I think a lot of people, she had been raped a lot of times and had to sleep with men that she didn't really want to sleep with. And she just goes over those parts without really discussing them much. And people, readers on Goodreads, took an affront to that. And I say to them, how could she have survived if she didn't? The last 2 years of her being underground, she was living with a Dutch guy as a married woman, living as a married woman in a building that was full of Nazi hate, that was full of Nazis and that who hated Jews. And she was able to survive under those circumstances. I mean, what this woman went through, of course, she didn't end up in a concentration camp, but she suffered. She starved. She suffered, and she was brave, much braver than I know that I could have been. But she also wouldn't leave Germany after the war. You know, when all her friends started leaving Germany at the end of the war, she ended up having a nervous breakdown. She felt, no, I'm legal. I belong here. I was born here. And she ended up, she married someone, and a Jewish guy who had went to Palestine and came back because of her, and they raised their children in Germany. Anyway, I'm sorry if I'm talking too much about this book, Underground in Berlin. I loved it. I didn't find it clunky like some people did. There are a lot of characters because she stayed with a lot of people. She's so funny. She makes fun of people, but in a good-natured way. She had love-hate relationships. Even the Dutch guy who ends up saving her when they ended their relationship and she went back, and he went back to Holland. He comes to see her. He knew where she lived, or he guessed where she lived. And she said, tell him to go away. He gave me 2 black eyes. I don't want to see him. You know, so she was angry. So that's emotion. But she ends up going, you know, downstairs, and they made up, and she knows that he helped save her life. And they ended up meeting each other after that until he left for Holland. And I think they kept in touch after that. But anyway, read this book. If you like World War II memoirs, if you like to read about brave people who do things that are beyond the beyonds, as the Irish say, who go the extra step to survive, who feel that survival is sometimes not a pleasant thing to do, but they have to do it because they have that much of a will to live. Anyway, I'm sorry I'm talking so much about it, but I love this book. My next book is, I won't be talking about it too much, and you'll be glad to hear about that, is A Caribbean Mystery by Agatha Christie. The reason I'm not talking about this so much is because I'm going to do, not a review, but a sort of Agatha Christie, what I learned about Agatha Christie. Was she woke? Or nope. This book, I really loved it. I said many times that I was told to read it by Lil of Lil's Vintage World. This is her favorite Miss Marple book. And what's good about it is Miss Marple is in it from the beginning to the end. And she's more active than she is in a lot of her other books because she's in she's in the West Indies. what they used to call the West Indies, what we call the Caribbean. And she doesn't have her network of gossipers and talk. So she has to go the extra mile, which was very interesting. And all I'll say about it right now is that she's basking in the Caribbean. Her nephew has sent her there because she had been sick. And she got pneumonia during the winter before, and her son sends her there to rest, to warm her rheumatism, and I can understand that. And she was like saying, here in paradise, nothing happens, which of course isn't true. I live in a place they call paradise, Hawaii, and things happen. So eventually her interest is aroused by an old soldier's yarn about a murderer he has known. And then after that, murder ensues. And Agatha Christie becomes very involved in the murder on how to stop the murders. So stay tuned to my video about this book, because it's going to be a doozy, as we said in New York. Okay, so basically that's what I read this month. But I'm also reading The Country Girls by Edna O'Brien, an Irish writer. And I'm reading it with Alba from Seriella. And we're almost finished. We love it. And you'll hear more about this later. I still have a few chapters to go. I'm also reading on my Kindle Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South. So I can't show you the book, but I guess I should put it over here so you can see the cover, because you can't really see the cover on my Kindle. And I have to say that I'm struggling with it a bit. This is my first Elizabeth Gaskell that I'm reading, and I'm not getting along with the main character right now. There's a lot of interesting characters. I just won't talk about it yet because it might get better for me. The main character might get better for me. But right now, it's meh for me. And I'm going to end with some magazines that I'm reading. We had a pay telephone right across the street from our library that was turned into a free library. I had mixed feelings about that because, hey, I want to see, I think we should have a pay phone. Not everyone has a cell phone. Pay phones they're part of history. Anyway, they made it into a free library. They didn't take away the phone part. I hope they don't. So I picked up some magazines, and this was Real Simple. And did you ever realize that reading Real Simple was very complicated? I mean, it says, shiny and tidy, clean your home in way less time. So, and you have to cook fresh, delicious spring recipes and minimize and organize. I read this magazine when they first started, and I thought, great, a magazine about simplicity and minimalism. And then I realized that it's more about selling you stuff. I guess that's okay. But here's dozens of ideas from people who downsize, do less, and live more. I mean, it has what I don't like about it, I'll tell you, beside the fact that there's a lot to do, so you're not really minimizing or simplifying your life. There's also a lot of things to buy. So how can you minimize when you end up bringing so much stuff back into your home? So I think they should call it not simple. But anyway, maybe you like this magazine. I don't know. Well, this was my wrap-up. This was my first wrap-up. I say it's my first because I joined BookTube in last August. And we're here almost at June, but I haven't done a May wrap-up ever. So I hope you like my rambling wrap-up. If you do, please subscribe and hit that notification bell, and you'll hear more of the Baby Boomer Booktubers' thoughts. And until we meet again from beautiful Hawaii, I bid you aloha.